I got a little alphabet soup for you today. You know how it is in the collision industry. We love our acronyms. So today's no different. We're talking about RTAs, PRIs, DVs. That's right. We've got Steve Krieps on, and we're going to chat about it. Maybe see if these are things that you should be using or helping your guests use in your shop.
Welcome to Body Bangin', your podcast for all things body. Auto body, that is. And now, introducing Body Bangin's host, Mickey Woods of Mickey Woods Marketing. Mickey is a former auto collision center owner and is now a marketing and business development expert to shops across the globe.
Hello, and welcome back to today's episode of the Body Bangin' Podcast, where we are at the Southeast Collisiion Conference. We're talking with all the different speakers that spoke. But before we get into today's speaker, we just want to thank our sponsor, Lombard Equipment. Lombard sponsored this whole series at the Southeast Collisiion Conference. And if you don't know Lombard Equipment, you got to get to know them. They also did an episode. And if you haven't seen it yet, maybe it's not even shown when you're watching this one, but keep an eye out for it because they're offering an incredible deal for Body Bangin' listeners on one of their newest pieces of equipment there. That's just like the Swiss Army knife of equipment. Super cool. Anyway, today we are on with a good friend of mine that it's been really hard to nail him down, but we got him today. Mr. Steve Krieps. Am I saying your last name right?
Krieps. Close.
Krieps.
It'll work.
All right. It's like you're from LA, like the Krieps, the game.
Yeah, I answer to pretty much anything. So
as long as it's G-rated, you're going to roll with it.
Yeah, well, nowadays, I don't know. It doesn't matter.
So Steve, I'll just give a quick introduction on Steve. He's from Collision Safety Consultants of West Virginia. He's also the former WAMBA president. And so he's very familiar with all things Southeast Collisiion Conference, I'm sure. But Steve, you did a session and it was really cool because you were actually on a panel. It ended up just being, I think, you and Adrian Mora, right?
We had Barry Dorn and Chris Burton to provide some shop perspective, but yeah.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. So they spoke on, I'll just read the title. It was Repairer to Repairer, RTAs and PRIs, the process and the shop's role. And it was like a panel discussion. So RTA is right to appraisal for those of you guys that don't know. And then PRI is post-repair inspections. So I don't know if you're familiar, but I do this thing called the Collision Cocktail Hour. I'm one of the hosts, and we do it once a month. It's for shop owners, managers, that kind of stuff. And everybody jumps in and we help each other with like the hot topics, the frustrations, what's going good,
Absolutely.
What's going bad. We just recently talked about the RTA, right to appraisal. And we've got some shops that are loving it. And we got some shops that are hating it. So it's yeah. Are you feeling the same thing?
It's a slippery slope. There's a lot of variables that can play into it. And if you don't know, who you are as a facility, and then on the other side, the appraisers that you may refer to, who they are, where they stand, it can put you in some pretty interesting positions if you're not careful.
Yeah. So one of the, and this, we're just going off the cuff here because this is maybe not what you talked about in your discussion, but because it was a panel discussion, I assume you probably spoke about a lot of things and we can't jam it all into, 15 minutes here. But one of the frustrations that people have with the RTA is how long the vehicle sits for. So on the shop side, did you guys talk about that in your panel?
Yeah. We discussed various options and ways that different people handle it.
Okay.
Me personally, with my business, by the time a consumer has gotten to a point to where they're at this stalemate, if you will, with their insurance provider regarding, what is proper indemnification for their loss, I don't feel at that point they've kind of gone through enough. At this point, as a shop, I always ask any facility that's looking to potentially use me as a referral, I always ask them, if they invoke their right to appraisal, are you willing to accept the outcome of the appraisal process? We're talking, it's supposed to be a neutral, unbiased, independent review of the circumstances, facts. And this is just me personally. I generally won't get involved unless the facility's intention is to take the car, get it in one end and out the other, and deliver it with agreement on acceptance of the outcome of appraisal. I know that might not be for everyone, but I do know that it can create some contention when the car sits, and obviously, if a car's sitting at a shop, it's being protected by their garage keeper's insurance, so there is a cost associated with it. They may or may not be charging for that cost. There's a lot of variables that play into it. Shops got to govern themselves accordingly. But you could run afoul of state regulations, state requirements. There's just a lot of things that play into it that you really got to know, because a lot of us appraisers, I'm in West Virginia, but I've handled claims as far as Washington State.
Oh, wow.
In Texas. So, I do a lot of research ahead of time. Luckily, I'm blessed to have colleagues all over the United States that I can call on and say, hey, point me in the direction of these rules. So let me make sure I understand them before I get into something that maybe I shouldn't.
Right.
I may know the collision side, I may know the estimating side and can do all that, but those state rules and regulations are going to play heavily on it as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I kind of feel like we jumped into this conversation assuming there was some understanding about RTAs specifically. And I forget that not a lot of people even really understand or know that the right to appraisal clause even exists.
It's a secret.
It really feels like it is. I don't think the insurance company would like to keep it that way.
And I think the more people know about it, it seems like the more they're trying to pull it out.
Yes, agreed. So do you want to sum up real quick for those people that don't know what the right to appraisal clause is?
Sure.
What that is?
It's just a contract provision, a clause within the policy that is designed to efficiently, and I know some people would argue over whether or not that's true, but it's designed to keep things out of court, no litigation. It's just a way to handle a dispute over the amount of the loss. Now, it can't determine coverage. It's just once the damages or what's part of the damages is agreed to, now there might just be a disagreement on what it would take to correct those damages, rental costs, anything, loss of use. Some of that's all going to be part of the loss.
Right.
So if you reach a point of a dispute, the right to appraisal allows a policyholder or an insurer, they can invoke this right, which allows each side to hire various language, but essentially it's supposed to be an independent and unbiased third-party appraiser that is not beholden to anything. They're supposed to go out on their own, do their own diligence, and determine what their position would be for the amount of the loss. They also will agree to an umpire. It'll be another, appraiser or certified umpire that will basically play tiebreaker in the event that those two appraisers can't agree. And then a decision signed by any of the two typically is binding on the parties. Again, just for the amount of the loss. And that could be repair disputes, total loss ACV. It could involve storage, rental disputes, anything covered under the terms of the policy that's subject to the loss.
Right. Yeah. And so a lot of shops are using this because they feel like it's kind of like this hidden tool that they've discovered on how to get paid for the work that they're doing, because insurance comes back, wants to pay $6,000 and you're like, well, it's going to cost $16,000 or $10,000 apart from each other. Now what? And so typically for some shops, there's just a $10,000 balance bill going to the customer, the guest. And other shops are helping their guests invoke the appraisal clause. And I think that's the other piece of it is shops don't really know what it is. But then when they know what it is, it's what is their involvement in it? Because I've heard shops say, well, we're going to invoke the appraisal clause. Do you want to get into that for a sec?
So the first of all, an insurance policy has a provision in there that you cannot assign rights of the policy without the express written consent of the insurance provider. It's going to take both parties of the contract in order to agree to allow assignment of rights of the policy itself. Right. So that right to appraisal is a provision that's only afforded to the two people that are a party to that contract. So the shop really doesn't have a dog in that fight.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, I know a lot of times when they throw those words out, a lot of adjusters on the other line will just let them play along. They'll play right along and be like, oh, well, okay, yeah, do what you got to do. Essentially kicking the can, because at the end of the day, they know that that's not something that you can do.
Right.
So shops just got to be careful. And that's what it started off with, a lot of your upper tier shops that were having some struggles, had some people that they've talked to, legal minds to find these, and they're utilizing them. And then now it's more and more mainstream today, which is where we're ending up with a lot of the problems, because like you said, shops are just seeing it as a way to get paid, whereas they don't really have much of a role in it. I mean, you're still, as a shop, you're still going to have an appraiser contacting you. And if you don't work with them or provide them information, they're just going to have their client, which is your client, is going to call you and say, hey, you need to give this guy whatever he needs so he can do his job.
Right.
Because I have to collect information the same as an insurance appraiser. I might come out, I might need to come out and look at the car, take photos. I might want to see measurements. It's not as intrusive in the sense that I'm not, as an appraiser, I'm not just going to look at you and say, well, that's ridiculous. You shouldn't be doing that. That's not my role. I mean, whether I agree or disagree with you is irrelevant. I have a job to do.
Right.
I'm going to do my job.
Right.
But yeah, so shops do have a tendency to get involved in something that really they can't.
Right. Yeah. So it's really, so for those of you guys listening, it is for the vehicle owner to invoke it, and they need to be the one to communicate with basically somebody like Steve. And I actually did an episode with Billy Walkowiak a while back, and we really get into the weeds of what it is. So I'll put a link in here. So for those of you guys that want to kind of get some more basic understanding, you can go back and watch that episode, since this is a short one today. So anything else that you feel like was a hot topic on that panel that maybe got a little heated, or that you felt like seemed to be something that a lot of people resonated with a lot of people?
For the most part, it didn't really ever get heated. A lot of people were concerned with, the time, like you had mentioned.
Yeah.
How long can the car sit? Who pays for that? And things like that. And you had to explain to them that there is no real guidelines or anything, unfortunately, in most states or in the policy. So you got to always keep in the back of your mind, that old term, fair and reasonable. You deserve to be compensated for the work you do fairly, but to the contrary, the consumer doesn't deserve to be paying an exuberant amount. At some point in time, you have to decide, what is your end goal and who are you working for? What are you trying to accomplish here?
Right.
So you're going to have to, in some respects, work for your customer. And whatever that means to you, that's for you to determine. But the outcome of the appraisal process is going to progress at the speed at which it does. Unfortunately, there's no timeline. Some of these can go, I've had them go 6-8 months.
Yeah.
Various reasons. Sometimes it's just breakdowns in communication, people not responding. And there's, you're just an appraiser. I tell everybody, I'm just the appraiser. I'm not an attorney. I'm not the cops. I can't go force somebody to do anything.
Right.
But your state's Department of Insurance may be able to do something. You might want to reach out to them.
Well, and I know some shops, like when we had that conversation on the collision cocktail hour, there are some shops who will put the car through production. Even, so the customer invokes the appraisal clause, gets somebody like you involved. And because you're considered a private adjuster, a public adjuster?
So I am a public adjuster licensed in West Virginia, but I'm never hired as a public adjuster. That's a whole nother set of rules.
Oh, okay.
My state and a lot of states that I do business in do not have formal appraisers licensing, which is good and bad. If it had one, I would be more than happy to get it. It's not a problem.
Right.
But the bad side is you can literally have people on the other side working for the insurance carrier that may have little to no experience at all.
Wow.
There's no formal requirement.
That's crazy.
It makes no sense.
Yeah. So the customer will hire somebody like you, Steve, and then while you're doing your thing, then the vehicle gets put into production because they're like, we're going to fix it one way or another. we're fixing this car. And I think the biggest thing that was flushed out is the communication with the customer, like an understanding. But I think the hard part is the shop, you, the customer, getting all on the same page if the shop doesn't even really understand. Like, what is the shop's role? If they're not understanding what their role is, if they're not understanding what the process is, how do they kind of coach the customer through it? Like, at least having a general understanding.
Yeah, I mean, the shops definitely need to. I mean, I tell people all the time whenever they're considering it. Obviously, I give them my contact information, and I'm like, give me a call. Let's, we'll sit down and talk about it. I'll share everything I know about the process to make sure it's something that you want to be involved in.
Right.
Because there's just so many considerations. I mean, as a shop, cash flow is a huge one that not a lot of them think about. I mean, a lot of them want to do their initial estimate, and then when it comes back 10 grand deficient, they immediately want to, tell the consumer that maybe they should look into right to appraisal. And I tell them all the time, I'm like, well, why don't you really go through and see where the differences are and see if you can do a better job at communicating those differences to the carrier? Maybe there's a misunderstanding, some sort of breakdown. Maybe, and I don't necessarily agree with this, but you catch more bees with honey. So it's like, well, maybe they just need to see, maybe it's not that they're saying they're not going to cover it. Maybe they're just saying like the typical, we need an invoice or a photograph to prove it.
Right.
Okay, maybe you can get them to document that. So that way it's at least in print that once you provide it, they're going to pay for it. You know what I mean? So there's a lot of things that I tell these shops that you should probably do. I don't like to see somebody invoking a right to appraisal until at least 2 solid supplement attempts have been done. Because a lot of shops just, they hear about it, they do the initial, huge difference, go to RTA. And then if you're doing that and putting it in production, you know what I mean? Like, you could be laying yourself out to a lot of upfront cash.
Yeah. Although I will say, of the group that we were talking with, the majority of them, and it's interesting, like the terminology people say when they're talking about this type of thing, they were it really goes back to the customer was awarded a dollar amount that was close to what the initial estimate repair order was. And so that's really what the shop feels like is a win, is it's getting paid for what they're supposed to be doing. And so in their mind's eye, it's like, so they don't have to go back. It's not the fight. I get all sides of it. But I can see how it's just tricky. And then there you are, you're the guy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a lot of them, you get a lot of facilities that they, maybe they hadn't done their homework to really know where did they stand with regards to what they were writing. And then, so they end up in situations where maybe they were doing things. I mean, I know it's ridiculous because most of the time we're talking about them not knowing the P pages and not charging for things that are included or not included. But I mean, I've actually had instances where they were writing for things that were duplicates and included in other operations, a significant amount.
Yeah.
Or worse yet, they were providing, because I always ask for a copy of the image report because it's just easier, and you'd look at pictures and they were charging for certain things that I was on the fence about, but I could see a path. Yeah. But then when they were sharing information, they didn't even do it.
Oh, wow.
You know what I mean? So it's like, you got to follow the whole, say what you mean what you say.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Don't go asking for the sun, the moon, and the stars and then not even remotely come close to delivering that.
Right.
And so the outcome was not what they were, anticipating.
Yeah.
And, that is a risky run. It happens. There's fluctuations. There's give and take. A lot of us appraisers, because you get some appraisers that are very rigid, and I'm not saying they're wrong. I mean, the clause is very specific. It says that you'll each determine the amount of the loss. And if you don't agree, it goes to the umpire.
Right.
I mean, if I've done everything and I'm at X, you've done everything and you're at Y, and they don't match, then we don't agree.
Right.
And there's some out there that's how they treat it. There is no gray area. It's if our numbers don't match when we sit down to talk, then let's send it to the umpire.
Yeah.
Which is an additional cost to the consumer and the carrier.
And more time, I would imagine.
Oh yeah. And it is what it is. There's nothing anybody can do.
Yeah. Okay. So I feel like we could talk about this for a long time.
There's a lot to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Because this is a short episode. I also wanted to bring up, because the other piece of that was the PRI, so the post-repair inspections. Talk a little bit about that, because I don't know exactly what you guys spoke about.
So with post-repair inspections, the number one, kind of the underlying thing was avoid them. You don't want to be in one.
Oh.
They're not fun. It doesn't generally work out well for the shop if you're the subject or the target, as it were.
Yeah.
I hate using the word target because then it feels like it's like an intentional hit piece, but that's not the case.
Right.
And just know that what your sheet, these final bills, I mean, you're essentially saying that this is what I did to the car.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get somebody that's, a lot of the PRIs I do, the first thing I do is I'll review the final bill.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's something, a car that's relatively new, something I've been in the procedures within the last few months, it might be fresh on my mind, and I can just look at it and be like, wow, there's some pretty important items on here that they didn't even document.
Mm-hmm.
I understand if you have it on there and it has a $0 amount.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe to avoid an argument, you just made a business decision that you're going to do it, but you're not going to charge for it.
Yes.
That's, it happens.
Yeah.
And so then it brings up questions. I'm not a big, when I inspect cars, I'm not a big, paint issue type of inspector. I can find flaws in factory finishes. So unless a consumer is actively like pointing things out, shrink back, dye back, some of that stuff I might point out, but minor nibs here and there, I'm not going to go setting the house on fire for that. But your quality control, as a shop, you've got to QC these cars. Something as simple as a door just dropping a little bit, or something not working just quite right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not everything's perfect. We know that, but those little attentions to detail can open up a can of worms. And what you usually find out is there's a big disconnect in shops between when a car comes out of even minor semi-structural repair, secondary structural repair, and whenever it's in final assembly, which by then everything is probably somewhat hidden, they're missing little things like corrosion protection on the backside or inside of cavities. So 6 months after the repair, 6 weeks, we're taking a look at the car, and just with a simple flashlight, and a bore scope, nothing real crazy. We're not taking anything apart. We can look up in these cavities and we can see all this corrosion already take place.
Mm.
Well, once it starts, there's no real stopping.
Right.
So that the biggest thing is just, as a shop, I tell everybody, constantly QC, spot check your guys. Not that they're intentionally trying to do anything wrong, but if you're a flat rate shop, especially, you've got to watch your guys.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be mean to them if you don't want to, but watch them.
Yeah.
Go over your cars, go over your bills, ask yourself, did I do all the necessary checks? This is not a conversation about, did you get paid for it? That's a whole separate thing.
Right.
But, just because you might not be being reimbursed for it, or you don't want to bill the customer for it, whatever your reasons is, that doesn't mean that gives you the right to not do it. If it's a required operation, you're putting somebody's safety potentially in jeopardy. Don't deviate from these procedures. I understand as a technician myself, sometimes you can look at a procedure and think that's absolutely ridiculous. I get it. But you are not an engineer. You've got that Holiday Inn Express, degree that doesn't count. Do the right thing, and steer clear. Now, as far as shops for, I get a lot of shops that are like, hey man, I'm competing with these 3 or 4 facilities in my area, and I'm constantly seeing work come, in from unhappy consumers that are wanting me to get back in and redo their work, and I don't want to touch it. Just remember, if you touch it, it becomes yours.
Now yours. Yep.
A lot of states, West Virginia included, have some pretty strict regulations with regards to if a carrier recommended a facility, and that's why they went there, and you find deficiencies, then that consumer can have great success just involving the state's Department of Insurance if the carrier doesn't want to step up and do the right thing to correct it. Unfortunately, the correct thing to do on a lot of these is a total loss, because by the time you get back into something like a quarter replacement, you're talking about now replacing even more.
Right.
So my advice to shops is just mind your P's and Q's, cross your T's, dot your I's, do your best. Danny and Kyle talked about, estimating and building your files, learn what you can, do what you can.
Yeah.
To try to basically stay out of them. If you find something coming into your shop, You can work with the carrier and the customer if you want, but know your state's rules. See if the customer has it, because if they don't, and it's say they chose the shop, if they don't have some sort of legal help attached to them, you end up in a situation where everybody throws their arms up and crosses them and says, we're not going to do anything.
Right.
Well, now you've kind of made some promises, or maybe you took a car in and you don't have a hammer big enough to do anything about it.
Right.
So
Robert Grieve did something. He's got the airing of grievances on YouTube. It's really good. And he was talking about something about that recently. The second they see that a vehicle has been repaired previously and they can clearly see there was an issue, it was like, stop, hands off. We're not touching it. It ends here. And I totally understand why. So for customers, when they're getting to you, is it because a shop is recommending that they contact you? Or are they like going on Google? Because I would imagine the average person doesn't even know what a post-repair inspection is.
Right.
I would imagine.
Most of my post-repair inspections are either referrals from somebody that was trading in a car and when it went through service, their technicians told the sales rep, hey, like, we don't want this car and here, it's got some major issues.
Right.
And then the second is diminished value. A lot of people are, considering going after diminished value. And one of the things that I'll do on a diminished value claim is I'm looking at that final bill. I'm looking at any images they can provide me to see what is the scope of the damages. Because there's a difference in a $10,000 all over paint job for, an angry, better half that keyed your car versus a $10,000, frame, some kind of welded on component, airbag.
Yeah.
So in the process of looking at those documents, you'll run across those inconsistencies in the repair bill, like omitted things, missing things, and then I'll ask a simple question, are you happy with your repairs? And unfortunately, more often than not, the answers is, it's okay. Or, it's a wrecked car now. So, I can't really ask for much, which, that's ridiculous, but that's what you hear. And then, I'll ask them, would you like to have the car looked at to, for some peace of mind? And if they say, they'll either bring me the vehicle or I'll go look at it. And I do what I call my parking lot inspection. I go with a cell phone and a flashlight. And so far, I haven't found many that didn't start with just a cell phone and a flashlight.
Wow.
And that was all I needed to really get enough evidence to basically show that there were some serious things done wrong or incomplete,
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's just, it's a little scary to think about how many cars are just out on the road and God only knows what was done to these things.
Absolutely.
Good. Scares me. Yeah. Okay. So I'm like minding the time because there's like several questions in my brain that I really want to ask, but I also know we're like trying to be on a short episode. So I'm going to have to hold it. We'll have to do another one of these and get into it a little bit more, especially as like when I spoke with Billy, gosh, maybe it was like a year ago now or something, but RTAs have become so much more popular. Even 6 months and a year, it's just really blown up. So people are exposed to this now more than ever before. And the diminished value, the DV and all that kind of stuff. There's like all these new acronyms that we have to learn. And so very, very interesting, Steve. I would imagine there are probably a lot of people that came to that class.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was almost full. A lot of shop owners for sure.
I bet. Well, if you guys are at another conference and you see this type of thing being talked about, I really recommend you go check it out. Also, talk potentially with your state association and find out what the laws in your state are. Interesting because like Steve was saying in the beginning of this episode, there are a lot of policies where they're pulling out the RTA. So, and then certain states, I know State Farm is one of them, has completely pulled out the right to appraisal from a lot of their insurance contracts. So you don't even have the option. The customer doesn't even have the option anymore. So, but you've got to know, and a lot of people don't even know what a lot of laws are in their state. So that could be maybe, would you think that would be a good spot for them to check? Would be if they didn't know, to talk to like an association, or preferably I would
get a copy of your policies read those over. And then also I would talk to your state's Department of Insurance. One, ask them if it's a requirement of the policy. And if it's not, and you feel strongly enough about it, voice your opinion that it should be. You know, Jill and Robert and them down in Burrell, down in Texas, are doing a wonderful job, you know, stressing the importance that it should be a requirement. Some other states have also agreed. You know, I feel it is something that should be in the policy. I feel like there should be some guidelines, some requirements.
Yeah.
You know, if the states and everybody agreed that was necessary to kind of keep it fair and neutral like it's supposed to be.
Yes.
And have some oversight without everything having to go to court. You know, that would make it truly a beneficial alternative to both parties when there is a dispute. But, you know, until people start paying attention, asking questions, and becoming a little more informed, you know, it's just going to kind of be a behind closed doors, nothing to see here type circumstance.
Yeah.
And, you know, if it's gone, it's gone.
Right. Yeah. Well, this has been super helpful. I know that a lot of people have questions on this type of thing. I am sure you don't want your phone to explode with people wanting to know more about this.
Absolutely.
Where would you recommend if they wanted to just talk to somebody more about this? Where should they go? The collision safety.
Yeah, collision. If you just Google collision safety consultants, we have a location finder. I don't remember the last number, but I believe it's north of 30 now. We're in 30 different locations.
Cool.
You know, get on there, find the one closest to you, call them. Everybody, we're all kind of like a little network. So
yes.
You know, if you call one of us and we're not the one for you, we're going to put you in contact with whoever's necessary to get you taken care of.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'll put the link in the show notes for everybody. If that's something that you're interested in, you want to get some more information, or potentially if you have a guest there that you think you might want to connect with somebody, it can be, I've seen for a lot of shops, it's really been a game changer. But like Steve said, know what you're getting into, know what your customers are getting into, learn what you can. So I'll also put a link to Billy's episode so you can learn more about what we're kind of just scratching the surface of right now. So thank you, Steve, for your time. I really appreciate you taking the time and coming on.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah, it was really fun. I like it. I'm like totally into it. I totally geek out. My family makes fun of me because when this kind of stuff comes up, like we have neighbors and I'm like, you know, you should really talk to you about a diminished value claim on that. They're like, well, what are you talking about?
Yeah. No, I completely understand.
Yeah. I just can't help it. Like I just want to be that advocate. So anyway, thank you, Steve, for coming on. And then thank you, of course, to our sponsor, Lombard Equipment, selling equipment from Maine to Miami. They are the guys to get a hold of, and their information is in the show notes also, selling new and refurbished equipment. So we will see you all next time. And Steve, thanks again for letting me nail you down and getting you on here today.
Hey, no problem. No problem. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Hey, you
Bye.
Too. Bye-bye.
If you enjoyed today's show, make sure you hit the subscribe button. We have some incredible topics and guests coming your way you will not want to miss. If you are watching on YouTube and don't want to miss the latest and greatest, you'll want to hit the bell after subscribing, so you will get a pop-up each time a video podcast goes live. To our devoted fans, would you mind paying it forward and sharing this little gem with someone else you think may benefit from it? Much love from all of us here at Body Bangin', all things auto body.